Hello and welcome to episode 406 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Ben Olson. With me is Nathan Fox. We're the co-founders of LSATdemon.com and the LSAT Demon Daily podcast. Big update here. We actually got this question from Alex. The question is, hi, Ben and Nathan. Thanks for your assistance in getting prepared for the LSAT. The Demon has been very helpful. A question for you. It appears that LSAC has removed the limit on taking the test 3 times per testing cycle. Am I reading this right? And then Alex provides us a link. Thank you, Alex, first of all, for asking us this. I did not know about this until you sent in this question. With Sam on our team called LSAC to verify, but yes, the 3 test limit per cycle is now gone.
What about 5 times in 5 years?
That's still there. So you can only take the test 5 times.
Lifetime maximum, but 3 per artificial cycle is now gone?
Is now gone, which makes things much easier.
Thank Jesus.
Now, wait, I should clarify. This is starting with the August LSAT. So does that matter at all?
I don't know. Who cares?
June?
Let's assume it's gone. I mean,
it's gone. Yeah.
I hope to God that is gone, because how much, like, if you went back through the history of the Thinking LSAT podcast, all 400 whatever episodes, what do you think the total elapsed time is that we have been explaining how the 3 times per cycle, explaining how that works?
Good 3 hours at least.
I would take the way over on that. I mean, I feel like it comes up in classes all the time. I've had to write about it. It was very annoying. Now I am excited. I'm happy. I hope that this is good. I mean, I hope that it's real. They have, however, had restrictions, removed restrictions, brought back restrictions, changed those restrictions. That has happened half a dozen times in my 15 years of LSAT stuff. So I think you would also take this news with a grain of salt.
100%. I mean, we were not a couple of years ago, we had no restrictions whatsoever.
Right.
We went from 3 to some. What was it before that? A long time ago. Was it just 3 total?
I think when I started, it was 3 times period.
Period. Yeah, that was the total lifetime total of 3.
Yeah. And since then, they've gone to 7 times lifetime maximum, 5 times in 3 years. 5 times in 5 years. Sorry, 5 times in 5 years. Okay, so that we can say, all right? That doesn't take hours to explain. 5 times in 5 years.
And you don't really even need to think about that, because for the vast majority of people, they're not spending 5 years trying to get into law school. So you can just think about you have 5 attempts. Now let's use those as best you can.
The only thing it changes is that it makes it so that you don't have to try to strategize about which tests you can take and which tests you can't take. You don't have to think about that magical August reset anymore. Everyone is now released from having to think about that. It's just 5 times in 5 years. Our advice is going to stay the same. Don't take the test unless your practice tests indicate that you're ready to take the test.
Yeah.
Simple. That's a very simple rule. If you're happy with your practice test scores, you're ready to take the test. If you're not happy with your practice test scores, you are not ready to take the test. That's a bright line rule. And if they have a bright line 5 times in 5 years, then you don't really need to worry about that so much. You just say, okay, I'm going to be well prepared for my first attempt with full knowledge that I might end up taking it 5 times to get the score that really reflects what I'm worth. Hopefully it happens on attempt number 1 or 2 or 3, but you've got 5 chances at it. You shouldn't be wasting those chances. I guess you also shouldn't be super precious with those chances, right? We have one student right now in classes who I'm not going to name, and he's very earnest, and he is doing very well, like 177 average on his last 5.
Wow.
Could you imagine? And he's like legitimately asking me, he said, and this is, I love this question, actually. Sounds like a lawyer. He says, I still feel like I'm learning every day about this test. So should I take it? And I'm like, well, that's great. But yes, you're way up there at the high end of the scale. Why not?
Well, also the marginal benefit, right? The marginal learning that he's engaging in is relatively small. So
yeah, and he has 180 within his range right now.
Yeah.
If you have a 180 in your last 5 attempts, then you are ready to take the test. Right?
No further questions. Thank you.
Full stop.
Good day.
Yeah, I mean, because this isn't like you're not going into professional LSAT mode. And, even if you are trying to become an LSAT teacher, we require people to have 170 something to teach for us. So, like if you can get a 180 on a timed practice test that you've never seen before, then yeah, you're definitely ready to take the test. Even if you feel like, yeah, there's still some nuances. I still miss these questions sometimes and still feel like I'm learning about the test. That's great. I mean, as LSAT teachers, Ben and I, we definitely learn about the LSAT all the time and how to teach it. But we've been ready to take the test for an awful long time. So we wouldn't, my advice to that particular student is like, yes, hell yes, you take the test. And this now that we get to let go of this whole cycle thing, that's fantastic. 5 times in 5 years.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Good job, Law School Admission Council.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex, for writing that in.
And thanks, Alex. Yeah.
Today on the show, we get to interview Angela Vorpahl. She's the creator of the Law School Master Plan.
I thought that was a really great session or a really great interview with Angela. I was pleasantly surprised and interested to learn new stuff, not just about how to do well in law school, but how to think about what you're supposed to be doing on law school exams and how closely related it is to what you're doing on LSAT logical reasoning. That was the part that stuck out to me. Anything stick out to you about our time with Angela?
Yeah, the thing that stuck out to me was just having a plan when it comes to what you're going to do, either to get into law school or to get ready for law school. And then once you're in law school, I think is just astronomically better than no plan. Even if the plan isn't perfect, just some semblance of a plan seems to is likely to put people light years ahead of their fellow classmates. That was my thought.
She made a really good point during that interview. I mean, I in retrospect, reading those cases was a just vast waste of time. Just don't even buy your textbooks. It's ridiculous. I mean, for one thing, they're exorbitantly, obscenely overpriced, right? Paying $400 for a printed book in 2023. You got to be fucking kidding me. It's just, obviously a scam. But Angela's point was that reading those cases is 95% of it is never going to be anything you're going to need to know. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be interesting. It's going to be really boring. And you're going to be wasting your time that you could use that time to do stuff that is way, way more valuable.
It's funny. I forgot to think about this while she was on the show, but that's exactly what happened to me when I prepared for the bar. So I followed the standard approach was actually to read statutory law. It was summarized, of course, but to read and remember this stuff.
Was that through Barbary or whatever?
Yeah, through Barbary.
Okay.
And then and I would then do sample answers and submit them and do abysmal on them, right? And then I reached out to somebody and he said, stop reading all those statutes or the summaries of the statutes. Just look at their model question and answers. Read the book, he said, to read it 3 times. It was much shorter. It was 100 pages thick versus 7 books that are 300 pages thick, right? I read it twice. I couldn't get myself to read it the 3rd time, but it didn't matter. By the time I was done reading it the 2nd time, when I was responding to model questions, I was killing it. And I literally saw the same questions on my bar exam.
Oh, the exact same questions that were in the prep.
Yeah. In fact, when I went to go eat lunch, I read a couple more and went back, and one of them was after lunch. And I was like, okay.
You must have done okay on that one.
Well, I passed, but
yeah,
that's all I know.
Okay, fantastic. I think it was a really good interview. Really appreciate Angela coming on.
Let's bring her on. All right. Today on the show, we have Angela Vorpahl. You're the creator of Law School Master Plan. You came on this podcast once before. That was episode 378 to discuss the top 5 mistakes that 1Ls make on their exams. Today, I have one burning question for you, Angela. But before I ask you that, is there anything else you want to tell our listeners? The 35,000-foot view of you and why you're doing what you're doing today. Because you did go into law, right? If I remember correctly, you went to law school, you were a practicing attorney, and then said, no, I'm done.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be back. It's always really fun to talk with you guys about all things law school. And yeah, so my name's Angela Vorpahl, and I'm a law school strategy coach. So the main thing that I focus my work on is helping incoming 1Ls get really clear on how to prepare for law school, develop a really rock solid grade strategy heading in so that you can hit the ground running on day one and take all those steps that position you for the grades that you really want at the end of the semester. And so I think we talked about this a little bit on the prior episode about kind of how I wound up here, and it wasn't intentional. I kind of backed my way into it. And so, yeah, so I was a practicing attorney for 8 years, and then I actually started a YouTube channel, and the sort of goal behind the YouTube channel really was just to kind of express a lot of frustrations that I had with the system. And so it was kind of all the things that they don't tell you, but you're expected to know, and kind of almost like setting you up for failure is a little bit strong, but not putting you in a position to be successful, because I felt like there were a lot of sort of gaps in knowledge and kind of black box approaches to how to do well in law school and also how to do well as a new lawyer. And so I started making these videos about all the things you need to know and should do and things they don't tell you. And so I started getting a lot of comments from lawyers, but also from law students, just asking questions of, okay, well, what is law school like? And how do I do well? And what do I need to know? And I started to realize, this isn't something that's really known out there. And I guess I thought that in my 10 plus years since graduating law school, that these were things that, I don't know, might have just resolved themselves or issues that had been solved. And I realized very quickly that that was not the case, that this cycle just kept perpetuating itself year after year. And so then as I started to have these conversations, decided, well, I suppose I could maybe coach people around this stuff and kind of teach them the strategies for how to be successful and what to do. And that sort of led to where I am now, which is a full-time law school strategy coach. And I spend all my time helping mainly incoming 1Ls, but also 2Ls and 3Ls get really clear on where those gaps are and how to fill them so that they can go after the grades they want.
Great. I mean, we know that getting into law school is largely a numbers game. And I imagine that getting out of law school is also largely a numbers game. That's not our area of expertise, but is that true? That grades are the number one factor or one of the number one factors?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because I follow a lot of different lawyers and coaches and things on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And I've seen several polls, of course, not scientific data, but just anecdotal data of most people actually get their first job out of law school irrespective of grades, like the vast majority of people, because when we're talking about the small subset of law firms or legal organizations that really prioritize grades, we're usually talking about big law or federal government positions. And those are going to be, maybe 20% of the class are going to start with those jobs. And so if you're going after something like big law or a federal government position, yeah, they care primarily about grades and secondarily about everything else. And so that's why kind of my philosophy around it is, look, if you're going to start law school and you're already going to be putting in the hours and you're already going to be putting in like the late nights and long weekends and time away from family and friends, may as well do it as best as you can and then open as many doors as possible. And then you decide what career path you want to follow. And you're just in the strongest position you can be in. And then you can make decisions from there.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of those videos that, like your first ones on YouTube? What were the issues, like what were the complaints or the things that were surprising to people that you were unhappy with in your law school experience?
Yeah, so I think the very first videos I put out on YouTube were actually about new lawyer stuff. So it was, when you started a law firm and you know nothing, what is it you're actually supposed to do to not get fired, right? So like, how do you be a good associate, and what are the substantive pieces you need to know, and sort of the political pieces you need to know.
So that's more like, why the hell didn't law school teach me these things?
Yeah. And also why the person that hired you is also not teaching them to you. They're like, oh, great, you're here. Start working on this case. Can you please draft some interrogatories and request for production? You're like, what are those? Yeah, exactly. So that was like the frustrating piece, because I know as a new associate, I felt like I was going to get fired every 30 seconds because I didn't know what I was doing. And am I committing malpractice? Maybe, who knows? No one's telling me anything. And so that was the kind of the original pieces. But then the questions that I was getting in response to these videos were way more, I don't want to say basic, but earlier in time. So it was like, what is law school, and what is it like, and how do you do it, and that kind of stuff. And so I think that in terms of the law school piece, I think, when you say like the biggest questions, I think it was just, what is it and what do I do? Because a lot of people hear that law school is hard and it's different and it's a lot of work, but other than that, there's not really a lot of context around, well, how is it different, and why is it hard? And okay, great. I'm down to work hard, but how do I actually go about getting the grades that I want? Because I think for a lot of us, heading into law school, most of the people who continue on to law school do that because we've done so well in school up to that point, right? So we're used to getting straight A's, we're used to being at the top of the class. And then when you head into law school and they're grading on a curve and only 10% of people can be in the top 10%, then the question becomes, okay, how do I actually differentiate myself from 90% of the class if that's my goal?
Yeah, that's interesting. You're saying people are asking, what is it, or what makes it hard? It made me think of my first year in law school. I had studied econ for undergrad. And although econ is not a hard science like, say, physics or chemistry or something like that, it's still in the vein of, okay, we're trying to find out what is happening in the world. And so the debate around, the classes that I was taking was about, well, is this actually happening? Does this economic model reflect reality? When I was in law school, I remember sitting in class one day and just being like, oh, this isn't about what the answer is. It's just a very different, I really went into law school thinking that I would be learning, this sounds extraordinarily naive, but the truth, or, what the law is. There's something, right. I don't know, like there is some answer. And it's like, no, there's no answer. Yeah. It's all about, I don't know, just argumentation.
Because they need to keep you there for 3 years, right? Barbary keeps you there for what, 2 months to 10 weeks or something like that to teach you what you need to know for the bar exam. Like, they're teaching you the answers. That's the law. Yeah. Law school is like, well, let's talk about what the law isn't and what the law was. Right. And, the evolution thereof. And there's no answers in any of that. It's just like how to think like a lawyer.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Pay us tuition for 3 years. Yeah. And it's so interesting you say that because, a couple of things. Like, Ben, what you were saying, like the biggest takeaway or the biggest sort of mindset shift for people heading into law school, the most powerful one is going from what is the answer to what are the arguments I can make. And so when that light bulb clicks, then it's such a game changer because we're so conditioned to learn the information and then give it back to our professors. Like, what is the answer? And then I'll tell you what that answer is on the final exam. And so what I constantly am inviting my students to do is, okay, what is an argument you can make in favor of this party? And what's the counter argument? There's always going to be a counter argument. And that's where the juiciness lies, and also the points lie when we're talking about final exams. And because in law school world and in the real world, in the lawyering world, it's I hate to say absolutes, right? It's never black and white, but it's 99.9% not black and white. You're always going to be able to come up with a creative counter argument, even if it's a weaker one, or even if it's one that the judge doesn't find persuasive. You can make one, and that's where lawyering happens, and that's where the points happen.
Can I interrupt to make a quick LSAT note here, because this is an LSAT podcast? On LSAT logical reasoning, there's a direct tie-in here. Okay, on LSAT logical reasoning, on strengthen questions and weaken questions and any of the argumentative questions, it's totally the case that you're looking for all of the arguments. That's why we don't read the question first, by the way, on LSAT logical reasoning. We read the argument first because we want to know what the facts are and what conclusion somebody's trying to draw. And then we're going to think through the case on both sides. The correct answer to a strengthen question doesn't have to be good. It has to be the best that's there. And right. So like it's sometimes all you got is a real shitty case. It's like, oh no, my client is dumb. I got the facts are way against me here. Here's their argument coming in. Okay, but I can at least say this. And that turns out a lot of times on the LSAT to be the correct answer. I mean, frequently it's like actually a good objection. Oh, this is going to devastate the case. And then sure enough, you've predicted the answer. Anyway, yeah. It's nice to know that what we teach on LSAT logical reasoning is helping people in law school. And we've heard that many times. I mean, I just have never thought about it in exactly that kind of a context, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah. And it's actually really freeing when you as a student, right, when you recognize it and kind of internalize that, because it opens all of these doors to be able to talk and think and analyze in a way that doesn't feel so shut in. Because what tends to happen on final exams is people will think these thoughts in their heads. So they'll think, okay, well, so-and-so I guess could argue that, but nah, that's not a strong argument, so I'm not going to put that down. And then they can't get any points for it because it's not on the page. And so they're thinking the things, but they're discounting them as not the quote unquote right answer. And that's it, like those thoughts and those arguments are exactly what your professor wants you to put on the page.
Let me give another little tie-in. People will be on LSAT logical reasoning. They'll be like, I made a prediction and then my prediction wasn't there in the answer choices, so I didn't know what to do. And it's like, well, yeah, but you should have had like 5 different predictions. Or you're predicting the type of thing that might be good. And then sometimes you can get lucky where in the answer choices, something jumps out at you. It'd be better if you predicted it. But other times you read it and you go, oh yeah, that's also a good point. And it's like learning to think that way. Yes, very, very valuable, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Angela, this discussion is interesting. Nathan, you're going back to the LSAT, and I can't help myself but think forward to the future. And so you're absolutely right. It's like I went into law school looking for the correct answer, and I struggled because I wanted to narrow my answer down to that answer. And that's precisely the opposite way to increase your score, right? You're like, no, we're issue spotting. We're trying to find all the potential problems. Which
make
I do
all
think
the arguments. They don't have to be good. I mean, you could say, well, here's like you could make the argument or sketch it out even in an outline form sometimes, right? Don't necessarily have to even write the sentences. You jot out some notes and then you go, weak. Like you could rank your arguments and say, well, this one's good. This one's medium. This one's not very good.
And not even rank them, but like literally write those words on an exam. So one of the up levels, once people get really clear on the foundation of how to write one of these final exam answers, one of the up levels is to communicate to the professor that they know that you know which arguments are weak, which are strong, which are maybes. And so literally to write, P will make the weak argument that, or D will attempt to make a creative argument, but it will likely fail. And so adding in these literal words so the professor knows, okay, you're making an argument, but you also understand that this is weaker, this is stronger, this is a shot in the dark, and you will get points for that, not only for the argument itself, but also being able to contextualize it in the larger analysis you're doing.
Getting back to, why at least I wanted you to come on the show is I'm thinking about everyone who's listening here. Hopefully they're deciding not to go to law school, or they've decided to fully embrace the LSAT and do the best they possibly can on it. Assuming they do that, they get the best GPA they can get, they get the best LSAT score they can get, and now they've been accepted to law school or whatever. Should they do anything to prepare between now and the start of law school? Is that really a thing? Or, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, really good question. So the first thing that I will say, because it's definitely the thing I hear the most, the number one piece of advice I hear for law school preparation is there's nothing you can do to prepare for law school. And that has been sort of the party line for as long as I have been around. So 10, 20, 100 plus years. And I think, so the first thought around this is in my opinion, is to kind of take a look at that statement and decide for yourself if you think that's actually accurate. Because in the past, I took that as a universal truth. There's nothing you can do to prepare for law school. If you ask 100 lawyers, probably 90% of them, if not more, will tell you there's nothing you can do to prepare for law school. And I think the reason for that is because we didn't do anything to prepare for law school. So I don't know that law school prep or the prevalence of it has been around all that long. And so I think the logic goes, we didn't do anything to prepare for law school and we made it through. Ergo, you don't have to do anything to prepare for law school. And we'll take it a step further. Even if you wanted to, there's nothing you can do. And so I don't know if I actually told students that years ago, but I probably did. And then in these last years, since I've actually started like digging into it and analyzing it and having conversations with people and like reverse engineering how I got the grades that I got in law school, I realized, oh, no. There absolutely were strategies I used. There were absolutely processes that I used to rinse and repeat every semester all through law school. And so I think the first step here is beginning to be skeptical of that statement that there's nothing you can do to prepare for law school. And then I think from there, if you're open to being skeptical about that and you're starting this brand new phase of your life in this new challenge that is different and huge and important to you, and you're investing a lot of money to be able to do it, then the question becomes, okay, well, if I'm open to the idea that there is something I could do to prepare for law school, because that would make sense, what is that something? And so for me, I have a few thoughts around this in terms of like what to do and what not to do, specifically around the advice that I hear all the time. But the first thing I would say is if you do one thing, which most people have time for one thing to really do it well, I would say to focus on the strategies. So to focus on the study and application strategies for how you're actually going to do this thing when law school starts. And the reason for that is because, in my opinion, the way that I have seen this play out, there are absolutely steps and absolutely sort of like building blocks that will put you in the best position to be successful. Because what happens to a lot of us is we start law school and we don't really know what we're supposed to be doing. And that first week hits and there is no introductory lecture. So we're getting hundreds of pages of cases a week that we have to read. And so we kind of go into survival mode. And so we're kind of like reading every line of every case and barely keeping our head above water and like trying desperately not to fall behind. And so we get this tunnel vision where all of our like 100% of our time is just spent reading the cases. And then if we can get to outlines, we'll see. If we can get to canned answers, we'll see. If we can get to practice exams, we'll see. And inevitably that never happens, or that happens way too late in the semester.
And
so you get to final exams.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but the whole way along, when I was in law school, I was just thinking, oh, okay, so my job is to know this stuff. My job, and in lecture reinforces that, because in lecture, they're like this professors who aren't good teachers. They're trying to do the Socratic method, and they're basically just drilling you on the facts of the case, which is so stupid. Has nothing to do with thinking through the arguments at all. It's just like, did you actually read the case? Are you actually participating? And just drilling on the facts. So from the beginning, you're thinking, oh, this is a test of knowledge. I'm going to memorize stuff. I'm going to just have all this information and I'm going to know the answer. And instead, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I could feel myself like physically having a reaction to what you're saying, because it's totally true. The way that it's presented to us, explicitly or implicitly by our professors, is that reading is the most important thing. Doing well on cold calls is the most important thing. And then everything else, we're not even going to talk to you about. You do it or don't do it. However you do it, it's irrelevant. And what I've seen over and over and over is that the pre-class work is actually the least relevant, and all of the magic happens in the post-class work. And so what tends to happen is we invest 90 to 100% of our time in the pre-class work, desperately trying to get quote unquote prepared for class, leaving no time for the post-class work. And so we're not actually internalizing the material. We're not applying the material. We're not putting ourselves in a position to do well on the final exams. And that realization usually happens halfway through the semester, 3/4 through the semester, the day before an exam, before it kind of clicks that, oh no, I should have been doing this all along.
Wait, so Angela, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. It's almost like you're training for a marathon or in a triathlon or something like that. And your instructor, your coach, instead of having you swim a mile or whatever, your coach is like, okay, I want you to read about stroke mechanics, and then we're going to talk about it as a class on Tuesday, and I'm going to drill you on stroke mechanics or bike repair or something like that. And you never actually go swim. And then on race day, they're like, okay, cool. So today we're going to swim for 5 miles that way, come back, then we're going to get on a bike. And like none of that is an experience you've trained for, right? Let alone experienced.
Oh, yes, 100%. And to make it even worse, to sort of further that analogy, it's also as if, okay, we're gonna learn stroke mechanics on Tuesday. I'm gonna have you read these 100 pages. Only about 15 to 20% of that information is actually relevant, but you're going to have to figure out which 15 to 20% it is.
Oh,
and
it's
also,
old
by the way,
stroke mechanics, right? It's from the 1800s. That we don't use
written
anymore.
in a really... it's written in that we don't even use anymore, that it's written in a really complex way. There's a lot of other issues in there that you're not going to know and also are not relevant, but I'm not going to tell you which ones those are. Then we're going to get to class. I'm going to ask you a lot of detailed questions about your best guess at what you think is relevant. I'll probably embarrass you a little bit. I'll make you super stressed out. And that's not great at all for anybody who's actually trying to learn anything. And then maybe after that process, I will tell you what is actually important. But if I'm a professor who actually takes the approach, that's not my job to teach you the law, then after class, it is now your job to go teach yourself the law with other outlines and supplements.
Wow. And you still haven't even gotten in the water yet. You're still just
Yeah. It's real crazy. It's really crazy. And in that whole process, if you have a professor who actually wants to teach you and understands how to teach and baby steps you through it, that's wonderful. And that's all you need to know. All of the work that happens beforehand is really, I call it like a ticket into class. Like it's really to be able to walk into the door and not throw up. Like that is all reading cases and pre-class work is, because we're also terrified that we're going to get called on and look like a moron, even though it's 0% of our grade. But what if our professor hates us and makes a note and da-da-da. And so all of that is just to be able to get a ticket to the lecture where we actually learn what it is we need to learn. And so when we're talking about how we allocate time, again, so many of us, myself included at the time, we're spending 90+% on pre-class work, 10% if we're lucky on post-class work. And so what I always go over with my students is we're actually going to flip those. And so when the thing that I'm coaching around and teaching this semester is actually a module around how not to read the cases. Because over and over and over, what I have seen happen, two things. One, complete misallocation of time in terms of reading the cases themselves. And you get so little ROI on reading the cases and actually learning the material. And two, I have never, the realization happened last semester for me that I have never once had a student come to me who was really excited about their grades and said, I am so glad I read every case. And I've never once had a student come to me to say, hey, I was really disappointed with my grades. I'd like to do better this time. I wish I would have read every case. And that's when it hit me. Like for me too, never is it ever the reading. That is never what moves the needle. It's always the deep thinking and the application pieces. And so if we can limit or even cut out entirely this massive amount of work that everyone assumes you have to do, we can open up so much time on the things that actually help you internalize it and actually help you learn how to apply it in a way that gets you points.
Okay. So what do people do before law school? I guess they reach out to you, or how do they figure out these strategies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's still not that well known, to be honest. So I think people kind of stumble upon it. And I was actually, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on this, but I was actually thinking about why law school prep has not been a thing for very long, or hasn't been that prevalent, myself included, when I went through law school, because the before and after law school, I think, is very well accepted, right? So it's very well accepted that there are things you can do to prepare for the LSAT. And it's very well accepted that there are things you can do to prepare for the bar. But I think it is considered by a lot of people to not only not be well accepted, but also that there is nothing you can do, right, to prepare for law school. And so I have a couple theories on kind of why that might be the case. But I think one is lived experience, right? Because it hasn't been around very long. Most of us have never done it. And so this cycle keeps getting perpetuated of saying there's nothing you can do. I think the other piece too may be that people believe that law school is not teachable. Like law school grades are not teachable. in the same way that like doing well on the LSAT is teachable or doing well on the bar is teachable. And I assume that's because those tests are more formulaic potentially. And maybe you can go, like the other piece might be you can go back and literally see every question that's ever been asked. So you can like break it down and analyze it step by step. But what people don't realize is that in law school, what I would say is probably 75 to 85% of the strategies you can learn beforehand, and that's going to apply across the board. Like it's just taught and tested in a very similar way all over the country. And then those smaller percentages of 25, 15, 5%, which is what I think people are thinking, is every professor is slightly different. And that's true. Every professor is slightly different. But that, again, that 25 to 15 to 5% of difference is actually personalizable, and it doesn't vary as much as people think it is. So if a professor lectures a certain way, or if a professor takes the position that they're not going to teach you the law, if a professor wants a certain thing on a final exam, those are all tweaks that can be made in the process, which is why I go through the first semester with my students. But you can still get a really solid base before you head in, and then know exactly how to execute on it, regardless of the professor, regardless of the class.
Well, so Angela, I think what you're describing is like actually just describing life in general. Because when I think about the LSAT, right, you actually have a lot of people who believe the exact same thing. Oh, you can't improve. It's not an improvable test. You're going to get what you're going to get. So don't waste time preparing anyways. And then you get into a group or a subset of people who are like, no, actually, there are some, everyone's different, but 80 to 90% of the best test takers are doing the same things, right? On some level. And the same is true even for, I mean, I shouldn't talk too much about it because apparently I don't remember very much, but for the people who were, the young associates, they looked at partners and they said, oh, everyone is different. It's like, no, actually, there's 10% where they have these idiosyncratic stupidities that you need to like adapt to. But 90% of what they're saying is formulaic and something you can follow. And I would imagine that's true just in so many domains, right? Like from the outside, it looks like art, but when you get inside, it's really much more of a science. And there's some consistent basics that you need to get down, or you're never going to be able to reach your full potential. And it's so much easier too, once you understand those rules. So anyways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and just to add on to that too, yes, that it works the same way in law school. You're absolutely right. It's like, oh, every professor's different. And then when you really break it down into the strategies and the action steps, it's like, oh, that's a 10% piece that we can then tweak and personalize, and depending on what it is they're looking for. And when you have that 85 to 90% in place, it's actually really liberating, because now instead of trying to like start from scratch and recreate the wheel and try to figure out how to put 90% of the puzzle pieces in place, and then also those extra 10%, having that 85 to 90% in place actually gives you a lot of energy and time to be able to focus in on that 10% in a way that you can up level faster and better than people who are trying to create the entire mosaic from zero. And so it gives you that opportunity to get personalized and idiosyncratic with your professors in a way that frankly, you might have zero time or energy to devote to that if you're just desperately trying to keep up.
You've been very generous with your time, Angela. Really appreciate you coming on. One thing that I have here on my agenda is that you might tell students what not to do to prepare for law school.
Yeah, totally. So the number one thing, strategies. The number two thing, which we may or may not have time to get to, career development stuff. So a lot of incoming law students don't know that there are actually steps that you can take before law school starts to start positioning yourself for your 1L and 2L summer job. But in terms of things not to do, the most common pieces of advice that I hear that I couldn't disagree with more, number one, focus on the substantive law. So there's a lot of talk around if you can learn the law before law school, or start to read supplements, or start to read cases and things like that. I actually think that is a very ineffective use of time for a few reasons that I may not even be able to articulate fully. But what tends to happen when people try to focus on this, which makes sense, right? It's like, okay, I'm heading into law school. Let me learn about torts. Let me learn about contracts. Let me learn about Civ Pro. And what tends to happen is that I think there's this belief, myself included at the time, that this stuff is easily learnable. Like you can just read a supplement and understand it. And what tends to happen is as you dig into these pieces, you realize they're way more complex and way more nuanced. And there's like a million different moving pieces that we're just not aware of heading in. And so instead of getting this like beautiful knowledge and understanding and holistic view, people tend to get overwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out, and think they're morons, think they're idiots because they can't understand this on their own when they don't realize that you have literally hired professional teachers to walk you through this information and make it understandable for you. And so I would not recommend trying to teach yourself the law before you head in. One, because I think it's very complex and nuanced in a way that's actually not entirely helpful to start beforehand, but also because the other thing you have to know is that when you start to just read a contracts supplement, it's very scattershot in terms of what it is you're taking in, as opposed to waiting until you get to class and your professor will get really concrete and really specific about the pieces of contracts law that they want you to learn and specifically the language they want you to use to describe those concepts.
So there's a lot of stuff in there that you're just not going to need to know and makes it a waste
not going to need to know or not going to need to know in that order or is way too overwhelming to try to take in all at once instead of baby stepping your way through it, which is what the semester is going to do for you. But here's the thing. The caveat to all of this is if you are just curious about what tort law is and what contracts law is and constitutional law, and you want to give yourself this high level understanding, my favorite resource to do that are the Quimby 1L videos. So you can get a 7-day free subscription to Quimby. You can go to 1L course videos and I would only recommend going 1, 2, 3 videos deep. And that will give you the words of like the high level buzzwords, legal terms of art. And not even to teach it to yourself, not to become an expert, but just to familiarize yourself with the words so that when you hear them in class, it's not the first time you heard personal jurisdiction. Yeah, or false imprisonment or something like that. But again, not to internalize and not to become an expert in it.
Got it. So, and I interrupted you. So I didn't remember that you were doing a numbered list. So we're going to focus on the strategies first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then
strategy. So strategies are the number one thing. And then I would say the number one thing to like shiny object syndrome to avoid would be trying to teach yourself the substantive law ahead of time. Feel free, like no harm, no foul, like going surface level deep just to show, like, let your brain hear the concepts. But that's really all I would recommend doing in terms of efficient time allocation. And then we talked about the second most powerful thing you can do before law school is actually career development stuff. And so specifically 2 pieces. So when you begin to apply for 1L summer jobs, usually those jobs will come online December, January of your second semester of 1L year. But some law firms are actually starting to recruit people even earlier. So I've heard of like October, November applications coming online as well. And so it can be, as you can imagine, incredibly stressful if one of these things pops up. Or you're at a networking event and they're like, "Oh, send me your resume." Now you go into, panic mode and you have to create this document really quickly and send it to people. And so what I would recommend is getting a solid draft of your 1L resume, your 1L cover letter, and your 1L diversity statement, looking forward to these law firm legal organization applications, because 99% of what you're going to put in those documents has already happened to you in your life. So I think there's this belief, which, rationally seems to make sense, that, well, I can't do those documents now because so much is going to change. I'll have gone through a whole semester of law school, when the reality is all you're doing the first semester of law school, if you're doing it quote unquote right, is focusing on classes. And so the most that you might change in that resume document that you've created is one bullet point for a student organization you kind of sort of joined, but I don't actually recommend doing anything substantive for. And then your cover letter is all about the experience that you've had ahead of time. And same thing with the diversity statement. And so you can get a solid, like 97% done draft of those things before law school starts. That way, when an application comes online, the only thing or the main thing that you're focusing on is customizing it and personalizing it to that law firm or to that legal organization. Why do you want to work there? What are their values and mission that you can help contribute to? And so that's a really, really great thing to go ahead and get in place. And then the other big piece of the career development stuff, which I didn't do at all, but looking back, I would have told my 1L self to do, would be informational interviews. And so I am not an expert in informational interviews, but I do have a video on my YouTube channel about it from someone who actually is really great at these things, that walks step by step how to do them, because it like when we talk about networking, that word is so nebulous and it's so intangible and it's not actionable. Nobody knows what you're supposed to be doing when you network, but informational interviews is the most effective, most organic way I have ever seen somebody explain how to build these relationships from zero. And so when you're reaching out to lawyers who are either going to be alma mater alumni of your law school, or practicing a type of law that you want to practice, or practicing in a city where you want to practice, you can start to make those connections early before law school starts. And then you can return to those relationships later on when you're looking for a 1L summer internship or a 2L summer job. And I think the biggest resistance piece around that is, who am I? I'm not even in law school yet. I have nothing to offer these people. Like it'd be embarrassing when you don't realize that you're actually in the most powerful position you're ever going to be in, because lawyers love giving law students advice. Like they love telling you what it was like when they were in law school. They love telling you what it is that they did. They love telling you how they got their first job out of law school. And so you're in a great place to have those conversations now in a way where it's not going to be nearly as organic. Not that you can't do it, but it's not going to be nearly as organic when you're reaching out in January when all these jobs just went online, right? Obviously, what you're looking for is a contact to get your resume read. And that, again, not to not do it, but it's so much more organic and relationship building if you can do it before law school starts.
Yeah, makes total sense. I talk about it in my classes sometimes. I remember my first semester 1L year looking over, I'm in my hoodie and like trying to keep awake, and I look over and there's a dude in a full-on suit, and he's got like a padfolio with his documents in it, and he's off to some interview, and I'm like, what is even happening? And I would see, from time to time, and this was 15 years ago, so it's not like it's a brand new thing, but from time to time, there would be a thing come out about like, hey, if you want to apply for this or that internship or whatever. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm trying to read my cases and do my outlines and be ready to be cold called. And meanwhile, there were other people there who were playing a completely different game. I don't know how they knew to do that, but they were, just on a different level. They were definitely prepared before law school for some of that stuff that I couldn't even have imagined I would need to do.
Yeah, well, same. Oh, go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying earlier, Angela, like people are not allocating their time correctly, right? So if you know how to allocate your time correctly, that frees up your most valuable resource for these other kinds of things. I mean, like you're saying, Nathan, I felt the same way. I was just trying to tread water, right? Like, oh, what's next? What am I reading tonight? Like I have to read these 100 pages. I'm not looking online for jobs. I'm not thinking about any of that. And there were other people who they're playing a different game. They're like, well, I've already studied what I need to study today. I have extra time to think about this stuff, and peace. See you later. Good luck with your life. So I don't know. Anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. What jerks. No, I mean, it's definitely true. And I was in the same position too. I was a first gen law student, so I didn't know any of this stuff, or that you were supposed to be, or that any of it even existed. And so I did the thing that you should never do, that I would never recommend to my students, which is, these internships are coming online in December. I'm going to spend a week putting together my resume, putting together my cover letter, putting together my diversity statement, applying to all these law firms, which I do not recommend that you do, because that's the week before finals for most people. But I thought that you're supposed to get these in when they first open. And so if you can if you can front load the work, you can hand pick the pieces that you want to apply to, or you can then open up time and space during the winter break, to actually mass apply to these places, because you already have those documents in place. And not only can you apply to a bunch of places, you can make your application materials much more powerful, because now all you're doing is the personalization piece. And so now you are being very specific about each law firm and each organization you're applying to, not just giving them a cookie cutter cover letter or resume. And I think the other thing too, that you guys both kind of mentioned was this idea of having a long-term vision and a long-term perspective. Because I was the same way. When you start, for most of us, when you start law school day one, you're immediately assigned a bunch of reading and you're like, oh my God, I have to read 100 pages for tomorrow. And so then we get into like this hamster wheel of survival where our focus is and our vision is about 24 hours ahead of time. 1 week if we're lucky, or 3 days if we're lucky. And so the first thing that I always do when we break down the strategy piece with my students is we make a semester long plan and then back out of it so that every time, so that we have these progress points along the semester on a monthly, weekly, and daily basis. So you know exactly where your time is going and what it's going for and why and how this is building on each other so that it's not a surprise when, it's September and you get the memo, the legal memo, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't even started outlining. When is that supposed to happen? Like everything's already planned out. And so you know exactly when these things are supposed to be hit and why.
Very cool. Thanks, Angela. Seems like lots of great advice, lots of things for people to think about. Hopefully they stay focused on the LSAT and give themselves the time they need to do well in the LSAT so then they can then have this time to go into law school and be prepared, right? So many people are trying to rush this all in at the end. Well, now you're just going to be rushing even more, right? But anyways, thanks for coming on. What's the best way for people to reach you?
Yeah, so my website, probably angelavorpahl.com. And then if you guys have any follow-up questions about what we talked about, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram. I'm just at Angela Vorpahl.
Okay, very cool. Any last words?
I guess the last thing I will say is the biggest thing in my view about 1L prep is just keep a check on your energy, because the whole purpose of preparing for law school is to help you feel more clear and confident and empowered so that it doesn't feel like this black box of uncertainty and stress and overwhelm. And so when you head into like this preparation phase, keep a check on your energy that you're not going from, okay, this is helpful and I'm feeling really good about this to burned out and overwhelmed. Because once we cross that line into burned out and overwhelmed, you're now doing yourself a disservice because we don't want you burned out and overwhelmed before law school even starts. And so I know there's a lot of advice out there about like, take it easy and go on vacation and spend time with family and friends. And all of those things are really important. And if you're interested in taking steps to prepare for this big new thing you're doing, you can do both. And you can be balanced in taking preparation steps and also keeping yourself healthy and connected to the people in your life. So always keep a check on your energy because we want it to be positive and good. And we don't want you feeling overwhelmed and stressed before you even begin this thing.
Thanks again, Angela. That was good. I think there's a lot of good stuff for people to take away there.
Thanks, Angela.
All right,
that
guys.
was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Talk to you guys later.
Yep.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
A few listeners have asked about application timing. We've seen a surge of new students at the Demon lately. Some of those new students have no doubt just discovered that they only have one shot at the LSAT. That's the August test until the fall cycle begins. That's assuming they want to apply this September. So, questions. How late is too late to apply?
You got to apply in the fall, and we encourage people to apply in September. Some schools are offering scholarships in September. If you're not applying in September, then you're not making yourself eligible to get offers in September. So, I don't want to be like hardcore or extreme about it, but unless you're only applying to, the top 14 schools or something who are not probably fishing for scholarship candidates in September. If you're any normal person who's like, no, I'm hoping to get a scholarship from my regional school, or get into a good, maybe there are a couple top 14s in your area, but you're going to apply broadly to other schools in your area. I really think you should be applying in September. What do you think?
I agree. I think it's just crazy to try to rush the most important, or I should say, pivotal like step in your legal career, right? This is going to set the trajectory of your career, and just trying to rush into it doesn't seem smart. I want to get very specific here. Can someone take the September LSAT and apply in October?
You absolutely can. If I were in charge of your applications, we probably wouldn't do that. We would probably, well, first of all, you need to decouple the LSAT prep from when you're going to apply. I mean, I think 90% of the angst and problems that people have is that they decide when they're going to apply, then they start thinking about the LSAT. And if you've got like one shot and then you have to apply, that's bad times. I mean, if September is your fifth attempt in, you get 5 chances in 5 years. If September's your fifth attempt and then you want to apply in October, at least there, you're not going to like hurt your own LSAT performance by trying to rush into this. If you're at the beginning, though, of your prep, like if you just discovered LSAT Demon, you're a brand new student, you just started in June, and now you're like, well, I'm going to take the August and maybe September test and try to apply in October. I really am concerned that that's going to make you prep poorly for the test. I'm also concerned that you're going to feel more stress on your official test day because you only have 1 or 2 shots at it. As far as the strategy of applying in October, I think it's probably not the worst thing in the world, but we just every single year, we have reports of scholarships being given out by some schools, not all schools, just a handful of schools. But there are some scholarship money. There are scholarships being given out in September sometimes. And if you're applying in October, too late. That money is already flown out the door. Not to say you can't get a scholarship. October is, it's like 90% as good probably as applying in September.
Yeah.
And, and then it gets worse from there. So how do you want to start your legal career? Like, do you want to start this the best possible way? Do you want to be max prepared for a ruthless competition and system that really rewards preparedness? Do you want to start that like kind of prepared, or do you want to start that really super prepared? So I would just be open to the possibility of waiting another cycle if your LSAT is not completed yet and you're thinking about trying to apply this year. I don't know. It'll work out for some of you, but it won't work out probably for most of you. And you won't even have your best LSAT in hand yet. And so if you're not going to have your best LSAT in hand, then you definitely shouldn't apply. So that's why we can't be like taking the LSAT and thinking about application deadlines at the same time.
Yeah.
How about the October and November tests? What do you think about that?
It's just getting worse, right? It's just getting later in the cycle. You're just decreasing your chances. In fact, your chances of getting a scholarship or a scholarship that you like are just, it's like a logarithmic curve that's going down.
Yeah, it's going down, and it's going down faster. So it's like, October is even worse. November is getting really bad. December is like, you're at that point, especially when you get into like, take the November test. You might not apply until January, or you apply in mid-December and everybody's on holiday and it's as if you had applied in January. And at that point in the cycle, I mean, they're looking for people to pay tuition.
Yeah.
So,
hey, I have a random, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I'm curious what you think about it. And I think it has to do with the law school loans and the problems that they create.
Okay.
So the other day, and it comes back to application timing. The other day, we have a lot of drivers in my house, and we just got one more, and we're about to get one more in about 3 months. So I was looking at potentially buying another car, and I'm going cheap, I want a used car that's reliable, but just used and as low as I can get that price.
Yep.
And I was thinking about this because some of our kids' friends have been given cars that are brand new. And I'm just like, I don't even want to buy myself a brand new car, let alone some younger member of our family. But anyways, I was thinking about it and I'm like, why are they just so willing to willy-nilly go out and buy a brand new car? Now, I don't know. I haven't asked them directly, but part of the thought that came to my head was, wait, when I'm looking at buying these cars, I'm planning to pay full price upfront. So I'm looking at that price and I'm saying, can I let go of all this money right now? And that full price upfront makes it a little hard to do. if you're willing to look at a car purchase as a loan, then what you're focused on is the monthly payment. So it makes cars that are astronomically more expensive feel a lot cheaper, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, can I afford $500 a month? Yeah, I can do that. That's not so bad. So maybe that lowers the bar and just makes it easier for people to buy these cars that I would never even consider for younger people, let alone myself. So anyways, I was thinking about that as you were answering this question about law school applications, right? People have to pay a price in some ways, but because they can take out loans, they don't feel the brunt of that price. If you really felt the amount of money you're going to spend on this endeavor, would you consider compromising your LSAT score at all?
Yeah.
Like you got to drop this money now. Anyways, that's,
yeah.
Are those two disconnected or the same on some level?
Well, there is a major moral hazard from easy financing for sure. I mean, I'm not a Bible guy, but like money lending, money lenders, like those were described as sinners and bad people in the Bible.
I didn't know that, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we are on the same page that, yeah, like I tend to buy used cars as well. And I also tend to pay cash when I buy a car. I hate having a car payment. I especially hate paying interest on a loan. Mm-hmm. And even if it's, easy financing, right? Like low interest, still not good. I'm getting this like major benefit today in exchange for all of these little cuts, all these little crimes against myself that are going to be happening automatically every month for the next 3 or 5 years or whatever it is. Yeah, that is bad. And that is, law schools are just completely, that's their business, is letting people borrow a shit ton of money in order to go to their school. Other savvier applicants are lured to those exact same schools by scholarship dollars. And it tends to be the best prepared students, people who took their time, people who really prepped for the LSAT, people who got their best LSAT on record, people who applied early in the cycle. And then, in January, the law schools are out there like welcoming everybody. Oh yeah, no, our application deadline isn't for months now. Yeah, you got plenty of time to apply. They might give scholarships to some of those kids, but they have already been aggressively pursuing some who were better prepared and who applied earlier.
Yeah.
And they've got to pay for those scholarships. If you're not on a scholarship, you're paying for yourself and someone else. Law schools, they give scholarships to more than 50% of the class in many cases. What's this have to do with application timing? Yeah, I mean, the tie-in is, I think it's pretty clear. They're
for one, right? If you actually had to pay the full price today, whatever that price is, I think people would be astronomically more hesitant and much more cautious about what they are going to pay and demanding of themselves a higher LSAT score so they can potentially get a scholarship, right? But instead, it's like the loan system makes it possible to take out a loan for a number that's really kind of funny money to them. No one really has a sense of how much money that actually is.
They'll say with a straight face that it's good
debt. Yeah.
Good debt, green light, good debt. I mean, Ben and I were just talking about car loans, which I have seen them describe as yellow light, you might want to be careful, but also, I mean, we do need a car. So maybe we do need, a car loan could be okay. And then Ben and I are like red light on the car loan.
Yeah.
And then they get to, but law school, absolutely. Green light. I mean, yeah, that's good. You should pay more. You should borrow as much as possible. I mean, they don't say those words, but they just would not exist if it were not for those loans. Right. I mean, because the truth is, if the loans weren't available, most people would not go to law school. Like it just wouldn't.
They wouldn't go. Yeah. And
they would have to dramatically drop their price. They would have to
Yeah.
make their price be reasonable for what you can expect to get out of it. They would actually have to make it a positive investment. And then people would go, but it would be much more like it was in the 50s or whatever, when it was like law school, night school. It was cheap. It was working people. They were like developing their professional career instead of just kids straight out of undergrad borrowing $150,000 for this fantasy of being a lawyer.
Well, not to beat this too much, but like you said that car loans are described as yellow, right? Like,
Yeah.
Not great.
Credit card was red.
Credit card is red.
Obvious.
Well,
Yeah.
I would treat a car loan, like you said, as a red light, right? Like,
Right.
don't do that. But at the same time, I'd much rather take out a car loan than a law school loan.
At least I get a car.
You get a car for one,
Yeah.
and unless I'm being astronomically stupid, at the high end, what are we taking out a loan for 40, 50, 60? I mean, a really stupid loan, but that's still a third of what some of these law schools are going to end up.
Oh, well, yeah. Luxury car. I mean, 1 year at
Which I'm not interested in buying, right?
Yeah.
But even if I was stupid enough to go out there and do that,
It's about the same price. Yeah. I mean, it's like you're buying a BMW every year.
every year.
Yeah.
But you can trade in the BMW if you later realize it was a dumb mistake.
I mean, you could use it, right? Like,
Yeah.
And
Or sell it back if you're like
it has
in
some,
pain.
yeah, it has some value as an asset that you could sell back. That's right. And they would repossess it if you didn't make your payments. They can't repossess your JD, but you also can't file bankruptcy from your JD.
You cannot. That's correct.
Yeah, and you don't have anything that you can sell back. And if you don't graduate, you don't get anything at all. And yeah, I agree. That is it's a much bigger and scarier proposition.
Yeah. Anyways, all we're saying is that we hope you do everything you can to get the best LSAT score you can get so that you can minimize this cost and just set yourself up for success rather than trying to rush into it. And really, I think set yourself up for failure. Anyways, does our advice change depending on your LSAT score?
I guess maybe, I mean, like take the extreme case. Somebody literally has a 180.
Yeah.
Should they not apply in October?
Yeah.
You're probably okay. Like, I don't think that's gonna hurt you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then it's just sort of like November. Well, maybe, I don't know, December. Yeah, it's really not the best. January, February, whatever. You just get, the later you get in the cycle, the more the less likely it is that you're going to get a really like knock your socks off offer or have multiple competing offers that you have plenty of time to renegotiate. But yeah, we shouldn't be sticklers about September 1st or whatever, right? Don't obsess about the specific details, but the general strategy is apply earlier in the cycle because you're going to be getting in line way, way before people who are, trying to apply later in the cycle.
Yeah. Be LSAT famous. Please ask questions or share news with us at thinkinglsat.com. If you have questions about the LSAT Demon, email help@lsatdemon.com. You can also check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. Thanks to Angela Vorpahl of Law School Master Plan for coming on today. That was episode 406 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks all y'all for listening. Nice knowing ya. Don't pay for law school.